121 Awkward situation. Hiding behind a staircase corner, Minami and her friends were stealing a glance at the hallway in front of them. "Look, he's coming," spoke one of the girl after taking a stealthy peek at the hallway. Hearing such, Minami's cheeks turned completely red. She then shyly questioned, "Are you sure it's a good idea to ask his number so blatantly? If you keep on hesitating, then someone else might steal him away. So muster up some courage and initiate a conversation," spoke another girl with a ponytail. "Who in his right mind would think such about you?" The somewhat fat girl who was stealing glances of Hiro spoke. Those three girls who were hiding behind the corner were talking about Hiro. "What's so great about him? It's not like he's a celebrity. He's almost here," spoke the fat girl. "What are you cowering for?" Speaking such, the girl with ponytail gave her a gentle push. Upon getting pushed, she stumbled out of the corner where she was hiding. And as she stumbled out of the corner, she spoke in somewhat annoyed tone. "Why did you push me all of a sudden?" "Excuse me?" Hiro mumbled, feeling all confused. Since he had just arrived there, he had no idea what she was talking about. "Oh, sorry, I wasn't talking to you. I was just talking with my friends here." Minami apologized to Hiro while pointing her index finger at the corner. "I didn't know that you were friends with Ghost." With a sweet smile on his face, Hiro joked, "What are you talking abo?" While speaking such, she turned towards the corner. But there was nobody in the corner. Unable to find her friends, she went completely blank, and thus, she couldn't even complete her sentence. Completely dumbfounded, Minami froze on her place. With her cheeks and ears turning red, she was embarrassed to her heart's core, as if she had an egg on her face. What will he think of me? And where are those two idiots? He's definitely thinking of me as some kind of weirdo. Several thoughts appeared in her mind. She couldn't even bring herself to turn her head towards Hiro to face him. "Good luck with your friends." Speaking such in a cheerful tone, Hiro walked past her. The girls who were swarming around Hiro quite enjoyed her precious reaction. At first, they were looking at her very coldly, as if she was their mortal enemy. But after seeing her in that awkward situation, they all had a smile on their faces. They very much enjoyed her dumbfounded look. Even after Hiro walked quite far away from her, Minami was still standing at that same place with that same facial expression from before, completely dazed. Running down the stairs, the fat girl and the girl with ponytail came rushing towards her. And as they approached her, the fat girl asked excitedly, "What happened? Did you get his number?" However, Minami didn't reply anything at all. Neither did she blink her eyes, nor did she open her mouth. "What happened to you? Did you see a ghost?" The girl with ponytail asked with a concerned look on her face. Hearing the word ghost, she was brought back to her senses. And as soon as she came back to her senses, she raised her both hands and placed it atop the shoulder of the girl with ponytail. Her brows arched, she made a serious expression and spoke. "Ghost, you say? Now, I'll let you two see the ghost in me. What happened to you, Minami? Are you getting possessed?" Feeling slightly scared, the fat girl asked. "Yeah. What? Why? Why are you acting like this?" The girl with ponytail shuddered. As if Minami was about to hack at her, she was tightening her grip and bringing her face closer to the face of the girl with the ponytail. With their brows frowning, the two girls were getting more and more anxious and scared of her. And suddenly Minami hugged the girl with the ponytail and started sobbing. "Why did you two leave me all alone? He's probably thinking of me as a weirdo now." Her eyes moistened and her lips pouted. She whined like a little girl at that moment. Her crying voice was very sweet and as innocent as a little baby. Despite that, her sobbing face looked extremely pretty. Seeing her sobbing, the two girls standing there could guess that things didn't go well. And thus, they started to comfort her. Patting Minami's head, they tried to calm her down. Finally, after walking for a while, Hiro arrived in front of his class. And by that time, the girls swarming him who weren't from his class had all left away for their own classes as well. Sliding the door of the classroom, he unlocked the door of his classroom. And just as he was about to enter his classroom, his eyes landed on a familiar face. Fair-skinned guy with chubby cheeks and round face, coupled with black pupils and straight black hair, the somewhat obese guy was sitting right beside his chair. The guy was none other than Masao. Well, he was absent from school. 122 Hope. Noticing the sight of Masao, Hiro wasted no time and immediately went over to him to talk to him. However, Masao, who looked lost in his own world, didn't even notice the sight of Hiro until he heard the voice of Hiro. "Good morning, Masao," greeted Hiro with a warm smile on his face. "Ah." Hearing Hiro's voice, which came out of nowhere, Masao was startled. Masao then greeted him back a bit hesitantly, as if something was bothering him. Good morning, hi, Hiro." Looking up close, Masao's complexion seemed rather pale. And as if he hadn't slept well for a long time, beneath his black eyes, there were few dark circles. "Are you sick, Masao? Or is something bothering you?" Hiro asked straightforwardly after noticing his sickly appearance. "No, I'm completely fine," replied Masao while trying to hide his face. Because of Hiro's behavior towards him and the way he spoke with him, Masao, despite being afraid of socializing, felt somewhat comfortable talking to Hiro. He obviously doesn't look fine, thought Hiro after hearing Masao's response. He knew that something was wrong with him, but he didn't want to force him to say it, so Hiro slightly nodded his head and replied, looking somewhat concerned, "Is it so? It just looked to me that you were sick. Thank you for worrying about me, but I'm completely fine," Masao replied and turned his gaze away from him, as if he was deliberately trying to avoid conversing with Hiro further. And before Hiro could say more, Hiro was interrupted by the girl who sat at the second row. "I've been texting you, but why aren't you replying, Hiro?" Silky, smooth black hair, triangular face, fair-skinned, small black eyes. Her name was Akane Kurameya. She had put on a little bit of makeup on her face. As she came closer to him, a fragrant smell of perfume lingered around his nose. Delicate, sweet aroma that is floral, herbal, and evergreen woodsy at the same time. It was the smell of lavender flower. Not too overbearing and not too humble. Hiro found the smell pretty pleasant. "Oh, sorry, I don't use my account much," replied Hiro with a pretended smile on his face. Although he quite liked the smell of her perfume, he wasn't fond of the person who was wearing that perfume. "You don't need to apologize," she replied, while sliding her medium-long black hair behind her ears. "But are you free this Sunday? I just happen to have 2 tickets to the amusement park." As if she was trying to seduce him, she was trying her best to show her charms. However, it wasn't working well on Hiro. It wasn't the first time she tried to ask him out. The week before, she had asked him out to go to watch a football match with her. Just then Masato and his underlings entered the classroom, looking completely beaten, sore and exhausted. They were having trouble walking. And unlike other days, those guys were walking separately. As if there was some kind of farce going on between them, they looked divided. Witnessing the appearance of Masato and his underlings, Hiro could tell that the plan he had planned was carried out without any fail. "Thank you, Imai. Thank you very much for complying to my request." Hiro thanked Imai inside his head. Despite looking completely beaten, Hiro wasn't a bit concerned about them at that moment. He was concerned about someone else. Turning his gaze towards Masao, he wanted to see Masao's reaction. To his right, Masao was trying his best to avoid locking eyes with anyone. His lips tightly sealed and his gaze locked at the table. He looked pretty terrified. He looks pretty terrified. Well, it's only natural for him to feel that way after experiencing such horrible experience, thought Hiro while pitying Masao. Hiro then again shifted his gaze towards Masato and his underlings. Entering the classroom, Masato and his underlings began to make their way towards Masao instead of their seat. I did ask Imai to make them apologize to Masao, but are they coming towards him to apologize? Or are they planning on assaulting him? If it's the later, then I need to be prepared to do something, thought Hiro while clenching his fist. Then why don't you invite me to your match, Hiro? Akane pleaded. Akane, who was standing in front of him, was speaking non-stop, but still his attention was on Masato and his underlings. Thus, he was only nodding his head without even paying attention to what she was speaking. The more they approached closer to Masao, the more he started to panic. Clenching his fist tightly and biting his lips, Masao was sweating profusely. Masao's hand was shaking and his heartbeat was rising. And as if his heart would jump out of his throat, his heart was beating more and more faster. Hiro too was on standby. He was prepared to take actions as fast as possible. Thus, he didn't dare take his eyes off from them, not even for a second. Kitsu the fox face guy was the first one to arrive at Masao's side. Standing beside Masao, he was hesitating to speak something. Noticing Kitsu on his side, Masao, who was freaked out by their appearance, was about to flee. And just as he was about to rise from his seat and run away, Hiro grabbed his hands. As if he touched an electric wire, a shiver ran down his body just as Hiro touched his hands. But Masao didn't let out a single scream. Slowly turning his gaze towards the hand which lay atop his hand, he found a fair-skinned hand full of calluses belonging to Hiro. Masao then slowly raised his gaze towards Hiro's face. And as he locked eyes with Hiro, Hiro slightly nodded his head. Although he was still terrified, the determined look on Hiro's face provided him some encouragement. Just like the sight of dark clouds in a dry desert, he found some hope in Hiro's eyes. 123 lesson learnt. With a newfound hope, Masao loosened his body a little and sat down. But even with his newfound hope, his body was still shaking. His body was telling him to flee from the scene. After all, human beings are a creature of habits. And the fear of getting beaten and traumatized by Masato and his underlings had already been ingrained deep within Masao's core. Thus, he was still preparing to run away if anything were to happen to him. Kitsu then lowered his head and spoke meekly. "I'm sorry for hurting you. Please forgive me if you can." Hearing Kitsu's apology, Masao startlingly rose from his seat. His apology was totally out of his expectations, and thus, he was surprised to hear such words coming out from the mouth of Kitsu. The other guys, too, lowered their head and apologized to Masao. "Please forgive us, Masao. We'll never bother you again. As surprised as Masao was, the rest of the students present in the classroom were even more surprised. Although not many students were present in the classroom, since there was still some time left for the beginning of the class, the students present in the class all had the same reaction. They all were surprised. Those bullies are apologizing? Am I in some kind of dream? Some students present in the classroom started to gossip. Masao was totally speechless. His mind completely blank. He didn't know what to do in that kind of situation. The scene happening in front of him was dreamlike, and thus, he was still having trouble discerning between reality and dream. Turning his gaze towards Hiro, Masao then asked Hiro to pinch him. "Can you pinch me, Hiro?" Hearing his words, Hiro grinned and replied, "Don't worry. You're not in a dream. But if you're still doubting, then I'll comply with your request." Saying such, Hiro pinched him. "Ouch! This isn't a dream. But why are they apologizing to me all of a sudden?" Questioned Masao, feeling all confused. For a while, his fear was suppressed by their apology. Not because of some beating, Hiro thought to himself after hearing Masao's question. But obviously he couldn't tell him the truth, so he acted as if he didn't know anything about it. Maybe God made its appearance in their dream and guided them. Hiro grinned. "So, I think you should forgive them." Although it was really tough for Masao to do so, since he had been getting bullied by them for years and years. And the scars left from enduring years of pain wouldn't be healed just because of one single apology after all. So Masao was hesitating to forgive them. Even so, none of them rose their head up, and all of them continued to bow their head. Obviously not because they were sincerely remorseful, but because of fear. They all feared that they would get beaten again, by Hanagaki and the rest, if they didn't acquire his forgiveness. Masato, on the other hand, was still hesitating to apologize. Although he too feared the beating, his pride wasn't letting him apologize to Masao in front of the whole class. Noticing his hesitation, Hiro decided to trigger him. "Enjoying the performance, Masato?" "You." Gnashing his teeth, Masato was about to say something, but he paused all of a sudden, as if he remembered something. Flaring his nose, he stood tall, glaring at Hiro with his protruding eyes. Just like an active volcano which was ready to erupt, he looked quite furious. But even so, he suppressed his anger, nonetheless. Witnessing his face full of anger, Masao retracted his step a little, and Masao's suppressed fear was starting to rise, once again. Masato then let out a deep breath and bowed his head. Although he was prideful, he was also scared of getting beaten. Giving in to his fear, Masato then reluctantly apologized to Masao while clenching his fist. "I'm sorry, Masao. I promise that I won't bother you again." Just like Masato and others who were afraid of Undead Crown Gang, Masao too was afraid of facing Masato and his gangs. Thus, out of fear, he accepted their apology. "It's all right. I forgive you guys." Hearing Masao's words, they didn't stay there for even a second more. Quickly lifting their head, they immediately made their way towards their seat. While on his way, Masato glared at other kids who were looking at him, as if he was warning them to not speak of the things which they witnessed at that moment to anyone else. He was glaring at them with his furious eyes. "Quick, look away, or else he might target us instead," whispered one of the students while turning his gaze away from Masato. The other students who were looking at Masato did the same thing as well. Out of fear, they shut their mouth and turned their gaze away from him. However, the same couldn't be said to Hiro. He was still smiling and looking at the embarrassing state of Masato and his underlings. "I hope you all have learned your lesson. Otherwise, I'll have to think of something even more ruthless. So get on a good track and live a good life," mumbled Hiro under his breath while staring at Masato and his underlings. Gosh, that was terrifying and surprising at the same time. Akane mumbled while releasing a short sigh of relief. Masao, on the other hand, remained completely silent. His heart was still beating as fast as it was before. But after that apology, there was a subtle smile on his face. Masao was simply happy to hear from them that they wouldn't bother him again. Just then Rin too made his appearance. Casualty walking towards his seat, he said to Akane, "Can you move away from my seat?" Akane subtly clicked her tongue and sneered, "I'll go." And before she left, she said to Hiro, "So where should I come to see your match, Hiro?" Hiro was puzzled by her words. Since he hadn't paid any attention toward her earlier and had nodded to all her statements, he wasn't aware that he had nodded to her request of inviting her to his game. About that, Hiro started to hesitate. He had absolutely no idea on how to tell her that there wasn't even a match to begin with. About that, he must have forgot to mention you, but outsiders aren't allowed. Noticing Hiro's hesitation, Rin immediately made an excuse and covered him. "Did you not tell her about that, Hiro?" Rin continued. "Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you." Frowning his brows, Hiro made sorrowful face. "I'm sorry I can't invite you, Akane." "It's all right, Hiro. I'll come to your next match." Akane smiled and expressed her understanding. "So now can you excuse me?" Rin asked her to leave. "Fine, I'm going." Akane sneered. 124 League Tie Sheet. Sunday, March 15th, 2022. The sun was shining brilliantly in the blue sky above. With new leaves starting to bud, the once naked trees which looked completely dull and lifeless was once again starting to gleam with vitality. And with the temperature rising once again, spring, the season of rebirth and awakening had begun. Panting heavily, Hiro and his teammates who had just finished their morning training were sweating profusely in the U18 pitch while looking completely exhausted. And despite the end of the training, no one had yet left the pitch. They all were waiting for some announcements from the manager. "Is it about the Premier League, Senior Naoto?" questioned Hiro, feeling all curious about coach's order. They all were ordered to stay at the pitch for a little longer by manager Makoto, since he had some announcements to make. "I'm not sure, since there's still about a month left for the beginning of the Premier League. But it must be something related to the league." Naoto answered while taking off his goalkeeping gloves. That year's tournament was going to start from April 4th onwards. Takamoto Cup is only a month away. How time flew by. Just yesterday, it felt like I was in U15 team. Just yesterday, it felt like I was helping Masao. But it's already been about 6 months since I joined the youth team. Thought Hiro, feeling nostalgic. Maybe the tie sheet is out. Tatsuki, who was just beside them doing some light stretches, joined in. That makes sense, since there's only 20 days left for the beginning of the tournament. So it's probably about the tie sheet. Naoto nodded his head. Just as they were talking, manager Makoto, accompanied by few other coaches, made his way towards the squad. Those old coaches all had stern expression on their faces. Seeing the coaches, all the players present there at that moment immediately shut their mouth and focused all their attention towards the coaches. After reaching them, the coaches then paused at a certain distance away from them. Manager Makoto then stepped forward with a sheet of paper in his hand. Before making his announcement, he coughed a bit to clear his throat. "In my hand, I have the list of clubs which we'll be facing against in our group." Manager Makoto spoke while raising the sheet of paper above his head. "See, I was indeed right." Tatsuki grinned. "Obviously, we'll paste the tie sheet in the bulletin board, but before that I'll personally announce the name of clubs we'll be facing against. So everyone listen carefully." Makoto intoned in a serious way. "Altogether, there'll be 12 teams in our group, including us. And among those 11 teams, there are 5 high school teams. Yokohama F. Marinos, Omiya Ardija, Aomori Yamada High School, FC Tokyo, Maebashi IQEHS, Yokohama FC, Rietsukize Kashiwa HS, Kashiwa Reysol, Ikaritsu Funabashi HS, JFA Academy Fukushima, and Kiryu Daiichi HS. These are the names of the team which we'll be competing against." Makoto read out the names of the team from the tie sheet. Since Kawasaki belonged to the eastern part of Japan, they were placed in Premier League East Group. "I don't even know some of the teams in that list." Hiro mumbled casually, without thinking after hearing the name of the teams which he'll be facing against. "Well, it's understandable, since it's your first time." Naoto mumbled meekly. Since the coaches were still in front of them, Naoto couldn't speak aloud. "That's all for the team in our group. But there's still something left to be discussed. We still haven't selected our starting players. So I think you all know what this means." Makoto continued. Saying such, he completed his announcement. His last statement was very ambiguous. And as Makoto finished making the announcement, the players present there started to clap their hands. Although his last statement was quite ambiguous, Hiro could somewhat guess the meaning behind his statement. "The spots are vacant, so bust your ass off to clinch the spot," thought Hiro after hearing the announcement made by manager Makoto. Looking around him, he found the facial expression of his teammates quite different than what it used to look before. With a spark of fire burning in their eyes, they all looked very determined. He's really one cheeky bastard. By saying such, he had initiated a war among the players. Hiro murmured under his breath with a subtle smile on his face. And just as manager Makoto was about to walk away, Coach Kinsuke began to gesture something. As if he was telling that he forgot something, he was reminding manager Makoto to check his pocket. Hiro, whose attention was completely focused on manager Makoto, noticed something off. Did he forgot something? Thought Hiro while looking in front. Because of their excitement, other players completely ignored the thing happening in front of them. They all were thinking about giving their best. Manager Makoto then suddenly turned around and walked towards the spot he was standing a moment ago. The coach's actions greatly confused Hiro. "Stop for a moment, everyone," Makoto yelled. Hearing Makoto's loud voice, the players immediately stopped clapping their hands. "I thought that the announcement was over. Has coach forgot to mention something?" Players began to guess and chatter among themselves. "Silence," Makoto yelled once again. Hearing his roar, the players immediately shut their mouth out of fear. Makoto then spoke again. "The trial for new players will be happening today, so don't disturb the new players." The announcement left almost everyone shocked, their eyes wide open and mouth agape. They were shocked to hear such an important news. And what's more shocking was that Coach Makoto had nearly forgotten about the most important news. What? The trial's happening today? But why so late? Thought Hiro with his eyes wide open after hearing the announcement. But don't worry about the trial, and just focus on giving your best. There might be few players joining, or there's also a possibility that no would pass the trial this year. So saying this, I just want to remind all of you to focus on your own training. Remember, the league is just 20 days away. Saying such, manager Makoto finally ended his announcement for real. 125 tryout for new players. As if they were struck by lightning, most players were utterly shocked to hear the announcement of the trial. While striking his chin, Naoto mumbled, "I have been wondering about the trial. And like previous year, I thought it was postponed this year too. Will we see someone as impressive as Hiro from this trial? I just want another talented midfielder or winger to supply me with crosses." Feeling all excited, Tatsuki commented. Hearing Tatsuki's illogical comments, which made no sense, Naoto shook his head and suggested, "We need a defender right now. Maybe a fullback with good pace. We already have Shunsuke Hayashi, Umi Kajisa, and Akamasa Nakahara. With those three in the defense, even Leandro will have a hard time. But our midfield, it's mainly controlled by Kinzuya and Hiro. So we definitely need a midfielder right now." Tatsuki presented his own suggestion, which greatly contradicted to Naoto's suggestion. And as such, those two began to argue with each other. While they were arguing with each other, Hiro was wondering about something else. "I just have one question, though," Hiro mumbled while looking at Naoto. "Ask." Turning his gaze towards Hiro, Naoto nodded his head and gestured him to ask his question. "Since I didn't attend trial with other players, and also since it's an open trial, I was wondering if the trials will be held separately for U15 and U18 team, or will be held jointly. Obviously, it'll be held separately. After all, how can U15 kids compete against U18 players? Obviously, you're not included among those kids." Naoto calmly answered his question. Staring at Hiro with his gleaming black eyes, Tatsuki nodded his head and intoned, "Yeah, you're a monster. The picture of you dribbling an entire line of defense by yourself when we faced against Fuji High School is still vivid in my eyes. Indeed, not to mention your unbelievable 40-yard free kick against Kosho High School. For a moment, I thought that I was seeing David Beckham." Naoto added. After joining the U18 team, he had played in 4 friendly matches altogether, and in all those matches, he had contributed to the team by either scoring a goal or delivering an assist. Although all those 4 teams were complete amateur teams, still after watching him play, no one could dare to point a finger on his talent. At around 9 a.m., new players started showing at the youth facility. Players of different shapes, sizes, and appearance started to flock towards the youth facility. Some alone, some with friends, and some accompanied by their parents. New players made their way towards the pitch one after the other. Hiro, who was seated in front of the window of his room, was curiously looking at the players entering from the main gate. Standing beside Hiro, Shun was also curiously looking at the new players who were making their way towards their respective pitch. Players who had came for U15 trials were heading toward the U15 pitch. And similarly, the players who had came for U18 trials were heading towards the U18 pitch as well. And not only players, but a few local reporters were also making their way inside the youth facility, holding camera and microphones. Since the coaches had advised them to stay in the building during the trial, almost all the players were either in their room peeking at the new players, or playing game, or sleeping at the moment of trial. And coaches had specially warned Tatsuki, Naoto, and Kinzuya for making their appearance towards the pitch. Since they had already debuted for the senior team, the coaches were well aware of the reporters who were tailing them. New players continued to show one after the other, and soon the ground became so crowded that it looked like there were almost more than 150 players in the pitch. Seeing that many people, Hiro shook his head and rubbed his eyes. He then, with a look of astonishment, questioned Shun, "Did you also compete against this many players?" "Not that many," Shun drawled. Since he was totally immersed in the event unfolding in front of him, Shun didn't notice the look of awe in Hiro's face. "It'll be over in, at most, 4 hours," Shun replied casually. "That's soon." "How?" Hiro mumbled in great surprise. "First there'll be a test to test their physicality, after that they'll test their skills, and only after passing those 2 tests, they'll get to the 3rd round. And the 3rd round is a match," Shun replied. "Damn, that many tests?" Hiro questioned with a look of surprise on his face. "There's also interview," Shun added. "Knock, knock." And as the two of them were talking with each while looking at the new players in the pitch, suddenly they heard a knocking sound coming from their door. "It's me, Yuya. Open the door," shouted Yuya from behind the door. "Did you call him?" asked Hiro while looking at Shun after hearing the voice of Yuya. "No," Shun shook his head. "Then why is he here?" Wondering such, Hiro walked towards the door and unlocked the door. And as soon as he unlocked the door, he found Yuya with a wide grin on his face in front of his door. As if he was about to do something sinister, Hiro didn't like the smile on Yuya's face. Shunta was also tagging along. Let's go and watch the trial up close. Excitedly spoke Yuya. Yuya was planning on sneaking at the ground to spectate the trial up close. Let's go. Shun immediately agreed to Yuya's proposal. Hiro, however, was a bit hesitant to go with them, since the coaches had sternly advised them to stay inside the building, and he was somewhat afraid of breaking the rule. But he was also curious about the trial. Thus, out of curiosity, he spoke hesitantly. But what if the coach finds out? Just disguise yourself and mix with the spectators. There are so many spectators that coaches wouldn't even notice us. Haha, isn't my plan perfect? Laughing maniacally, Yuya explained his simple plan. 126 Advanced Technology. After thinking for a while, Hiro took the risk and joined Yuya and the others. Sneakily walking on their toes, Hiro and his friends were making their way towards the pitch, carefully. Yuya, who was walking in front, was responsible for checking people coming from in front and updating them with the path in front. And Shun, who was at the last of the queue, was responsible for checking the people coming from behind. Finally, after walking on their toes for a while, they made it out of the building, totally undetected. And as they walked out of the building, they noticed a bunch of people swarming beside the fences to witness the trial. Few small-time local reporters were also present there, interviewing some of the players and spectators and covering the event. Quick, hurry! Waving his hands, Yuya spoke hurriedly and began to run towards the crowd. They then hurriedly ran towards the crowd of peoples gathered in front to hide themselves from the coaching staffs. Hiro and Shunta, being the fastest among those four, quickly reached the crowd and mingled in the crowd. Yuya and Shun, the two of them took a little longer to reach the crowd of peoples. Sigh. Successfully blending in the crowd without being noticed, they then released a long sigh of relief. Phew. Yuya released a deep breath. Luckily, no one noticed us. Yeah. Thankfully, we made it without getting detected. My heart is still pounding, mumbled Shunta while feeling his heartbeat. We'll go to the U15 pitch since we're still playing for U15 team. Spoke Yuya. Okay, be careful on the way. Hiro responded while nodding his head. Yuya and Shunta then headed towards the U15 pitch, skimming through the crowd. Witnessing them leave, Hiro and Shun too began to skim through the crowds to get a clear view of the U18 pitch. Finally, after some searching and skimming, they arrived at a place where they could get better view of the pitch in front. Do you know any of them, Shun? Hiro questioned while looking at players in front. You see that guy close to Coach Kensu? Shun spoke while pointing at one of the guy. Who? That bulky guy or short guy, or that bald guy? Hiro asked. That bald-headed guy who looks like a monk. His name is Akihiro Yamada. I played against him when he was playing for Tsubaki Middle School. Is there anything special about him? Hiro questioned out of sheer curiosity. If he's that excellent of a player, then why was he criticized? Hiro couldn't understand the logic behind Shun's statements. I see. So he was simply getting held back by his teammates. Hiro nodded his head. Then what about these players who are getting interviewed right now? Hiro questioned again while pointing at some of the players who were getting interviewed. Maybe they played exceptionally well in the Nationals. Since we don't play in Nationals, I don't know about them. But that jerk with 2-block haircut, do you see him? Slightly scrunching his brows, Shun then pointed at one of the fair-skinned guy with 2-block haircut who was getting interviewed at that moment. Just by listening to the tone of Shun's voice and looking at his appearance, Hiro could tell that Shun didn't like the guy whom he was pointing at. Thus, he too pretended that he didn't like him. Who? That arrogant-looking guy. Yeah, you're right. That bastard's name is Renji Igarashi. He's so full of himself. Just because he scored 2 goals against me, he was acting so haughty after the match. Shun intoned while gritting his teeth. Monolid black eye, short black hair, fair-skinned. Renji's facial feature were well-defined. Flaunting his perfect smile by showing his clear white teeth, Renji was getting interviewed by a female reporter at that moment. Beep! Everyone gather around. Blowing his whistle, Coach Kensuke ordered everybody to gather around. Hearing the coach's command, all the players, including the players who were getting interviewed, rushed towards the coach. Sure, the trial is about to begin, mumbled Shun. And as all the players gathered beside the coaches then began to speak something. Since Hiro and Shun both were far away from the coaches, they couldn't hear the conversation taking place in the pitch. After a while, except 20-something players, the rest of the players began to head towards the stands. The remaining 20 players then positioned themselves in a running position outside the pitch. So for the first round, they'll test their speed? Hiro mumbled. You're half correct and half wrong. Shun spoke while shaking his head. They'll be sprinting in the sidelines and slowing down in end line. And they'll be doing this for 5 laps without stopping. And while they'll be doing this, their data will be calculated by the analyst present in sidelines. You see those 4 guys dressed in complete black dress with laptops? Shun continued while pointing at 4 guys seated in the stands opposite to them. Turning his gaze towards the 4 guys, Hiro nodded his head. But he still couldn't get how those 4 guys could calculate the data of that many players, since there weren't many people present there to record the data. And thus, feeling all curious, Hiro questioned, "But how will those 4 guys record the data of this many players?" As if Shun was expecting that question from him, Shun grinned and replied with a confident tone, "Do you see those black bibs with the numbers which the players are wearing?" Hiro nodded his head. There's a tiny chip installed in those bibs, and there's also a sensor placed at each corner of the pitch. So every time those players reaches the corner, their data will be collected by using some kind of software by those analysts. That's how they'll record their data. Puffing his chest, Shun explained in a confident tone. 127 caught. With no change in his facial expression, Hiro then murmured softly after hearing Shun's explanation. So they're using technology to record the data. Seeing no changes in Hiro's facial expression, Shun looked quite shocked. He then questioned while staring at Hiro with his eyes wide open. "You're not shocked to hear about such an amazing technology? Although I haven't experienced it myself, but I've seen way more advanced technology than these in my previous life," thought Hiro after hearing Shun's questions. But obviously he couldn't say that to him. Thus, he immediately thought of an excuse. "I have read about it before that in Europe these kind of technologies are quite common." Hearing Hiro's reply, Shun frowned his brow. He looked quite disappointed. And while the two of them were talking about technology, the people standing beside them suddenly started to cheer. Hearing their loud cheers, Hiro and Shun, both of them, startlingly turned their attention towards the pitch. "Look, the test has started." Speaking such, Hiro tried to distract Shun. And since the sidelines weren't that big enough to accommodate all those 20 players at once, they again paired 5 players and formed a group of 4. And in an interval of 15 seconds, one after the other, the 4 group of players started running. And as the final group of players completed their run, the first test finally came to an end. Completely drenched in sweat, all the players seemed extremely exhausted. The first test took about an hour to complete, and almost half of the players in the field were sent home after the end of the first test. With almost half of the players eliminated, there were about 40-something players left in the field for the second test. "Man, this is brutal. Almost half of them were wiped out," mumbled Hiro while looking at the players who were walking out of the ground. Along with the players who were eliminated, their supporters too started to exit the youth facility. Sweaty, pale, breathless, and tired, many of the players who were eliminated looked extremely gloomy. While there were few optimistic ones, most of the eliminated players were all pessimistic. And there were few who were even making a fuss at the ground by saying that the evaluation was unfair and rigged. "I finished way ahead of him. So why is he selected and I'm eliminated? Is it because he's one of your relatives?" One of the players in the field shouted furiously, expressing his dissatisfaction with the result of the test. "He's a keeper, and you're a striker. So you expect a keeper to run faster than a striker?" Coach Kensuke replied calmly. But still the guy continued to yell. Because of the grief of not being selected, he wasn't willing to listen to the logic of the coaching staffs. Every time there'll be some players like this. As if he was used to seeing such scene, Shun mumbled casually while looking at the players who were causing ruckus on the field. "If they continue to protest in the pitch, then the test will be delayed. So now what will the club do?" Frowning his brows, Hiro questioned with a concerned look on his face. "Nothing much. Either they'll leave on their own, or they'll get forcefully kicked out." Shun replied. "Look, they're already here." Shun continued while pointing towards the main gate. From the main gate, 4 guys dressed in guard uniform were making their way towards the U-18 pitch. While looking at the guards in confusion, Hiro questioned, "I thought we only had 1 guard in our hostel. How come there's 4 new extra guards today?" "You're right. We do have only 1 guard. But those guys are temporary guards hired by the club to deal with this kind of situation." Seeing the guards, some protesters voluntarily exited the pitch, while the few who were left in the pitch were forcibly carried outside the facility. "Geez, never expected that football trials would get this chaotic," Hiro mumbled. "That's why we're lagging behind the world. You don't get to see such scenes in Europe." Since Shun couldn't deny his claims, he too consented to Hiro's claims and nodded his head. Although the test was indeed unfair to those players who were technically gifted and physically weak, there were few reasons for the club to focus on physically well candidates. Firstly, by selecting players with excellent physicality, the club would drastically decrease the chances of injuries. Secondly, they could deploy the player right away. Thirdly, and most importantly, professional clubs were leaning towards players with excellent physicality instead of once creatively gifted players. Top-level coaches preferred fast and steady players, just like Mbappe and Haaland. With the coaches leaning towards players with pace and stamina, the era of creative players like Messi, Neymar was coming to an end. After the commotion died down, the second test continued smoothly without any interruption. For the second test, the remaining players were made to perform some of the drills, such as pass, receive, shoot, and few other drills which they used to do every morning and evening. And while the second test was taking place in full swing, Manager Makoto then suddenly started to walk towards them. Although he wasn't looking at their direction, he was definitely walking towards their direction. Noticing him walking towards their direction, Hiro started to feel anxious. Do you think Manager Makoto has noticed us? Shun too was starting to get anxious. He's not looking at us. So maybe not. Since a lot of spectators had left the facility, there weren't as many people as before to cover them up. And thus, if they decided to run at that moment, they would look even more suspicious. The two of them tried to hide their faces and turned around to avoid locking eyes with Manager Makoto. Manager Makoto, however, continued to walk towards them. During the earlier commotion, Makoto had already noticed them. However, Hiro and Shun, who were too focused on the guards, couldn't notice that they had been seen by Manager. Finally, after getting close to them, Manager Makoto spoke. You two guys wouldn't happen to be Hiro and Shun, right? Chapter 128 Volunteers. Hearing Manager Makoto's voice, their hearts skipped a beat, meekly exchanging glances with each other. They then began to gesture each other on what to do. Now, what? Should we run? Shun mumbled meekly. Frowning his brows, Hiro replied in his muffled voice. Didn't you hear him? He has already noticed us. So there's no point in running now. We'll only get punished more severely if we do that. And while the two of them were taking their sweet time, talking and gesturing each other, Manager Makoto was getting extremely impatient by their unresponsiveness. I know it's you two, so you two better turn around this instant. Makoto yelled. Hearing his furious roar, the two of them nearly jumped on their toes. They then slowly turned around to face Manager Makoto. Furrowing his brows and flaring his nostrils, Makoto was standing inside the pitch, looking like a furious grizzly bear trapped inside a cage. Didn't we tell you to stay inside the hostel? So what are you two doing here? Makoto questioned as soon as they turned around. Hiro quickly lowered his head and apologized sincerely. Sorry, sir. I was just curious about the trial. Seeing Hiro bowing his head, Shun too quickly lowered his head and apologized. Sorry, sir. He's new here. Makoto spoke, sounding somewhat disappointed, while looking at Hiro. He then immediately turned his attention towards Shun and continued. But you've been here for 3 years already, Shun. And you know how much I hate undisciplined players. And yet you still broke the rule and came to the pitch. Being a senior, why didn't you stop him? Hearing Manager Makoto's words, Shun could only keep his head bowed down and apologize. It's all my fault, sir. He's not at fault. Because of my curiosity, I forced him to take me to the field. Hiro apologized and tried to take all the blame on him. Hearing Hiro's words, Shun, while bowing his head, turned his head towards Hiro. Looking at Hiro with eyes full of admiration, Shun was touched by Hiro's words. Despite it being their idea to sneak at the pitch, Hiro was taking all the blame on himself now that they were caught. And because of that reason, Shun was starting to feel guilty. Thus, out of guilt, Shun was about to confess everything truthfully. But before he could confess, Manager Makoto interjected him. I understand that you're curious, but you two have still broken the rule, so you two will definitely get punished later in the evening. But for now, come inside. We're in need of some volunteers anyway. That statement of Manager Makoto was totally out of their expectation. Although they weren't exempted from the punishment, they were still invited to the pitch for the time being. And as Hiro heard that statement, Hiro quickly lifted his head and thanked Manager Makoto. Thank you, sir. Thank you for inviting us inside. Seeing Hiro's cheerful expression, Makoto shrugged. Don't get overtly excited. You'll still be receiving your punishment in the evening. Standing beside Hiro with his head bowed down, Shun, who was about to confess everything truthfully, was left dumbfounded. And seeing Shun still standing with his head bowed down, Makoto spoke. You two can lift your head up now. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Lifting his head up, Shun immediately thanked Manager Makoto. The two of them then headed inside the field. Who are those two? An anonymous guy standing outside the field questioned. They must be academy players. Another bald-headed old guy standing beside him replied. Walking inside the field as volunteers, they were tasked with collecting the balls and assisting the coaches. And even with the addition of Hiro and Shun, the test progressed rather smoothly. And just as another drill of the second test was about to begin, Makoto called Hiro towards him. Having been called by the manager, Hiro hurriedly ran towards the side of the manager. Hiro, can you demonstrate the drill for them? Manager Makoto asked him to demonstrate the drill that was about to take place. Hiro nodded his head. So everyone, please pay attention to him. He'll be demonstrating you the drill that you'll have to perform. Makoto announced while pointing at Hiro. Who's he? He looks younger than some of us. Is he an academy player? Upon hearing the coach's announcement, they began to judge Hiro. Staring at Hiro with eyes full of skepticism, the players began to chatter about Hiro. However, that reaction from the players was completely natural. After all, until then the coaches were demonstrating the drills. But out of nowhere, a young guy who looked even younger than them showed up and became the demonstrator. They simply couldn't help but felt doubtful about the ability of Hiro. And among those doubtful eyes One person raised his hand to question the decision of the coach. Fair-skinned, black hair, and good-looking, that hand belonged to Rinji Igarashi. Seeing his raised hands, Manager Makoto answered, "Yes." Without any hesitation, Rinji first scanned Hiro a bit and answered, "Sorry, sir, if I sound disrespectful, but this guy looks even younger than some of us. So I just can't help but question why you decided to make him our drill instructor. Would he even be able to demonstrate the drill properly?" Faced with Rinji's question, Makoto grinned and replied, "He's been doing these drills for 6-7 months now, so I'm sure he can demonstrate the skill well." Hearing Makoto's claims about Hiro, Rinji put his hands down and silently nodded his head. He had no intention to challenge the authority of the coaches. "So, if all of your doubts have been cleared up, then shall we continue the test?" Makoto intoned while tapping his hands gently. Hearing the coach's question, nobody spoke anything and they all remained completely silent. After that, they all made their way outside the pitch, toward the sidelines. Hiro, on the other hand, made his way towards the right flank. Standing 40 yards away from the goalpost, he positioned himself in the right flank, preparing to make his run. The drill, which they were going to perform that time, was quite simple. From 40 yards away, he'd have to make his run towards the goalpost, while another player would supply him with the cross from the left flank. And he'd have to sprint so that he could receive the cross. And after receiving the cross, he'd have to either shoot the ball without trapping or shoot the ball after trapping. The post wasn't obviously empty, since there was a net placed in front of the post, and only the bottom and the top corner had a hole in the net. So along with running and shooting, he'd have to score the goal in those four corners as well. Chapter 129 Worthy 1. That drill was specifically designed to test their speed and precision. And as Hiro positioned himself to make the run, Manager Makoto said to the players, "Everyone pay attention now." Getting everyone's attention, Manager Makoto then sounded the whistle which he was carrying inside his pocket. Beep! Hearing the sound of the whistle, Hiro started to make his run. Just in mere few seconds, he achieved his top acceleration. Sprinting like a wild horse, he sprinted towards the goalpost. At the same time, Coach Kensuke, who was tasked with crossing the ball towards Hiro, released the ball from his feet. Witnessing his speed, every player who were standing on the sidelines looked at him with their eyes open wide. And even those players who were proud of their pace couldn't stop themselves from looking at Hiro in awe. They all were stunned. Shun, who was rather focused on the players instead of Hiro, curled his lips slightly and mumbled in a satiated manner. As expected, the ball released from Coach Kensuke's feet was directly heading towards the outer edge of the penalty box. And Hiro, who had already predicted the path of the ball, slightly lifted himself up from the ground and gently trapped the ball in his chest. Without wasting any time, he then launched the ball towards the top left corner of the post. Witnessing his otherworldly volley, the players present in the field, all of them held their breaths. The ball swiftly flew towards a hole in the top left corner and landed inside the post. And just as the ball landed inside the post, almost all the players burst out into celebration. As if it was them who had scored the goal, they simply couldn't hold back themselves from celebrating. Whoa! Players began to cheer as the ball landed inside the post. Although it was only a demonstration, to them it felt like watching a veteran player performing his magic. Hearing their cheers, Makoto's lips curled as he revealed a subtle smile on his face. He looked satiated as if his purpose had been fulfilled. The whole reason behind asking Hiro to demonstrate the drill was to uplift the mood of the players. And judging by the reaction which the players were displaying, Manager Makoto believed that his purpose had been fulfilled. While almost every player were cheering for him, there were few players who were still not satisfied with the demonstration. They were saying it was just a coincidence or Hiro had been lucky. To rile up the players even more and to clear the doubts of the doubtful players, Makoto shouted, "Once more, but this time no trapping. You have to perform one-shot volley towards the bottom right corner of the post." Without replying anything, Hiro simply nodded his head and walked back towards his position. What? He's doing it again, and he have to do it according to the manager's will. Frowning their brows, some players started to feel concerned. They felt that manager was just pushing him too much, and he couldn't do it as mentioned by the manager. Just trapping that insane cross is already difficult, and he wants to make him perform one-shot volley. Furthermore, he also needs to aim the ball at the selected place. One of the players commented while staring at the post. The gaps in the nets were barely big enough to fit 2 footballs, and to score a one-shot volley from outside the box, while also analyzing the trajectory of the ball, it seemed near to impossible without perfect ball control, vision, and precision. And as the players started to chatter, the ambience around the field suddenly started to get a little noisy. Okay, then everyone pay attention again. After all, after this demonstration, it's your turn to perform, shouted Manager Makoto to make them shut their mouths. Hearing the command of the manager, they then immediately shut their mouth and focused their attention towards Hiro. "Ready, Hiro?" Makoto yelled. Keeping his gaze fixated at the post in front, Hiro nodded his head. Beep! Once again, as soon as he heard the sound of the whistle, Hiro took a quick glance at Coach Kensuke and sprinted towards the goalpost. That time around, there was an unusual spin on the ball. It's heading inside the box. He thought after predicting the trajectory of the ball. Wait, no, it's curving. After attaining its maximum height, the ball curved. And because of that curve, Hiro, too, decelerated. He's decelerating, mumbled one of the players after noticing Hiro's deceleration. The ball then began to fall down towards the penalty arc. Right before the ball fell down, Hiro stretched his right leg. And just as the ball was about to hit the ground, his feet made contact with the ball. Bam! Sounds similar to that of a balloon, exploding reverberated just as Hiro's leg made contact with the ball. Swoosh! Without touching the blocking net, the ball passed through the hole in the bottom right corner and made a swoosh sound as it made contact with the net of the post. The already shocked players were now even more shocked. They were all speechless. As if their brain couldn't even process all the information, they simply stood on their spot, completely dazed. Finally, one of the players broke the silence. So this is the level of Kawasaki Frontale's U18 team. Our other player in the team, monsters like him? Mumbled another guy while staring at Hiro with his eyes wide open. As if their soul had left their body, some of the players looked quite gloomy, while there were few players who were standing on their toes, looking quite excited. Among them one was Akihiro Yamada. With a crooked smile on his face, his eyes were gleaming with excitement. I need to get in this team. No matter what, I need to get selected. Only such players can receive my passes, thought Akihiro, looking all excited. Now, then the demonstration is over. So shall we continue our test? Manager Makoto spoke. Makoto's words brought everybody back to their senses. Few of the players who looked excited replied cheerfully, "Yes, sir." Chapter 1:30 Punishment. During the evening time, when the sky dusked and the shadows got long and hard, silhouette of two persons were seen moving in the field. Running laps around the field, Hiro and Shun were getting punished for their earlier actions. While Hiro looked completely fine, the same couldn't be said to Shun. Sweaty, out of breath, and his tongue sticking out, Shun was extremely exhausted. Looking completely out of breath, Shun mumbled while trying to catch up to Hiro, who was about 10 steps away from him. "Hiro, wait for me." Slowing down his pace, Hiro, whose shirt was already soaked with his sweat, replied, "Hurry up. We still have 5 more laps left." 5 more laps. With the pitch of his voice increasing, Shun exasperated as if he was on the verge of collapsing. Huff, huff, huff. Panting heavily and running as if he had hurt his legs, Shun continued, "We've already run 20 laps around the field." With his feet twitching and his leg muscles convulsing, Shun was starting to stumble. Hiro, who had already been holding back himself by running alongside Shun, matching his pace, turned around. And as he turned around, Hiro found Shun wobbling while trying his best to prevent himself from collapsing out of exhaustion and pain. Seeing the miserable state of Shun, Hiro ran backwards and grabbed Shun's arm and prevented him from falling down. "We've already run 20 laps, so let's give our best and complete this 5 more laps and complete our punishment." Hiro tried to encourage Shun. "It's not fair. You're a midfielder, so running 25 laps isn't a big deal for you. But I'm a goalkeeper." Shun complained about the unfairness of the punishment. "The most I've ever run is 15 laps. And today I've already broken my own record. My feet is already turning numb from pain. And it feels like I'm carrying 20 kilograms weight in my feet. Every step feels so heavy." Shun continued to whine. Even so, with Hiro's support, he didn't stop. And despite the pain, he continued to run. Finally, after about 20 minutes more, Shun completed the punishment alongside Hiro, who supported him and prevented him from falling down midway. Completely exhausted and drenched in sweat, Shun collapsed on the ground just as Hiro released him. "Good work there." Hiro complimented Shun for his perseverance, trying to cheer him up. "You set a new record for yourself." Shun, who was lying on the ground, was struggling to stabilize his breath. His heart was racing and his face looked flushed. And because of the exhaustion, he couldn't even bring himself to speak. Witnessing his miserable state, Hiro bent down and grabbed Shun's legs. He then began to massage Shun's leg to prevent it from cramping. While massaging Shun's legs, Hiro asked with a concerned look on his face, "Are you all right? Or should I inform Coach and ask him to take you to the infirmary?" While lying on the pitch, Shun shook his head. He then lifted his hand and gave him a thumbs up. Witnessing his gesture, Hiro revealed a slight smile and mumbled in a low voice, "Don't try to act cool now. I'll go and ask Coach for some spray and bandages." Saying such, Hiro released Shun's legs and began to make his way outside the pitch. While making his way towards the coach's office, he found few of the guys of U18 team sneakily coming out from the manager Makoto's office. Hiding behind the corner so that they couldn't notice him, Hiro began to wonder the purpose behind them coming out of Makoto's office. Shotaro, Shunsuke, Takashi, Yutaro. Why are they coming out of manager's office? Sneakily coming out of manager's office They then hurriedly ran away. And since Hiro had hidden himself perfectly, they didn't notice his presence. Just as they left, Hiro walked out of the corner. Looking at the sight of them leaving, Hiro couldn't help but think something negative after seeing them sneakily coming out of the manager's office. Did they steal something from manager's office? Or did they perhaps alter some documents? Since Hiro didn't have any decisive proof, he could only speculate. With no solid evidence, he couldn't simply frame them as well. Should I report to manager? Mumbled Hiro to himself. But if I do that, then they might turn against me. And it might also divide the team. So let's just keep it to myself. While he was standing in the hallway, thinking on what to do, he noticed manager Makoto walking down the stairs. Let's just keep it to myself. I'll ask for Naoto's suggestion later. Mumbling such, he decided to not tell about them sneaking inside manager's office for the time being. Hiro then rushed toward the manager to ask him for few bandages and muscle cooling sprays. While Hiro was gone, Shun was still lying on the ground. By that time, he had stabilized his heartbeat and breathing. No wonder people like him. He's got such a pleasant personality. And although he doesn't talk a lot, you could just tell by his actions that he cares. Shun mumbled while staring at the sky above him. Few stars were starting to get visible as the sky was starting to turn darker. Even Shun knew that earlier Hiro was holding himself back by matching his pace. His heart filled with admiration. Shun couldn't stop himself from admiring Hiro. But then suddenly his face darkened as he squinted his eyes. But not every people value kindness this day. I fear that someday your kindness will bring you big trouble. Although he was grateful to Hiro, Shun was also concerned about Hiro. Since Hiro was overtly kind to everyone, and as a friend Shun feared that people will take advantage of his kindness. As he was thinking such, a gust of refreshing cold breeze blew past him. As if the breeze was telling him that he was worrying for nothing, the breeze woke him up. At that moment, Hiro, too, came back with bandages and muscle cooling spray in his hands.